Welcome back, everyone, here to Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Mike Page. Thanks again for joining us here worldwide as we bring you the top stories and headlines from across the country. Well, one of the biggest stories still of this week, it happened yesterday evening, the FBI raid on the former President Donald Trump's estate there at Mar-a-Lago in Florida as several investigations continue into the former president. To help break down just a little bit more of how a raid like this is conducted and how it first has to be even brought up to a judge. Let's bring in our guest here this hour. His name is Roy Herrera, who served as an assistant U.S. attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice in Phoenix. Thanks so much for joining us here today and giving us all some insight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So first off, I would just like to know, as far as when the FBI comes knocking, there has to be something that they definitely saw in the investigation where they felt they needed to come on in.
Yeah, so it's important to remember here that in order for them to execute a search warrant, there had to have been probable cause that a crime had been committed. And that is something that a federal judge would have had to agree to. So at some point prior to the execution of this search warrant, a federal judge must have signed off and agreed that there was probable cause. But even before that, and I sort of drawing on my experience as a former federal prosecutor, there had to have been at the Department of Justice and at the FBI, at the highest levels, most likely, given the sensitivity of this, in order to even ask for a search warrant, much less execute it. So there had to have been a lot going into this. Obviously, this is an unprecedented situation. We haven't seen a search warrant executed on a former president before, but I think that it does show, the extraordinary circumstances that we're dealing with here with this potential mishandling of classified information.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was something that really not only rocked the political world, but just really every American citizen to hear a former president had his estate there raided by the FBI. And can you give us maybe some guidance as far as how long in this investigation do you think they were at where they came, where this was building, where this raid was going to take place?
Well, it's a little hard to say. I mean, I think it's important to remember how we got here. Originally, the National Archives informed the Department of Justice that there may have been a mishandling or removal of classified national security information from the White House, and that information would be, at Mar-a-Lago. And then there was a grand jury investigation that began. Subpoenas were served. There were requests for interviews. And clearly now we have seen an escalation into a search warrant. So it's a little bit hard. I mean, a lot of this is speculation on what may have occurred. It could be that the subpoenas, resulted in some information that made them believe that there was a criminal offense that occurred here. It could be, and again, this is speculation, that the target of the search warrant, in this case, the former president, was not being cooperative to the grand jury. And as a result, we have this escalation into an actual search warrant and the execution on the property at Mar-a-Lago.
And also, I would like to know, obviously there are things that they are looking for, and that's why they walked into Mar-a-Lago. But say they found evidence not pertaining to the items that they were looking for. Can they still grab those during a raid like that?
So the search warrant itself is going to basically tell the recipient of the search warrant, in this case, the former president, what they are looking for. And again, what the items are and sort of what the probable cause was for them to enter. So it's not as if you execute a search warrant and then suddenly you have the ability to just look at everything and overturn everything and take everything with you. That's not usually the nature, unless, of course, the search warrant was that broad. That's usually not the nature of these things. That being said, whatever they obtained, it sounds like from media reports that there was 15 boxes of documents that were perhaps obtained from Mar-a-Lago. They're obviously going to look at what those documents are and determine whether there has been a criminal violation, whether those were classified documents that should not have been removed. And also it could be the first step of many steps in an investigation. You could perhaps see additional searches happening in the future.
And maybe explain for something this classified when we're talking about at the highest levels of the DOJ and FBI, for a former president to be involved here. Can you maybe just give us some insight as, they were there for a good portion of the day and we didn't hear anything until the former president put it out. There was no leaks in between that time when they were on property and conducting the raid. So how many people from the DOJ and FBI side knew about that this was happening?
So because of the sensitivity of this, both from a political perspective and a public perspective, it's my sense that this probably got all the way to the top. I mean, there's no way to absolutely know unless they actually say this, but it could have gone all the way to the Attorney General and to the Director of the FBI. It likely did, again, given the sensitivity of this, and they would have had to sign off on, the probable cause statement and, the actual request of the federal judge. Then they would have had to talk to the federal judge and get him to approve it. And it's likely, and at least I've seen in news reports, that it was a federal magistrate judge in Florida that actually signed off on the search warrant. But before that, it would have gotten to the highest levels, I think, of the Department of Justice and the FBI per prior practice at those agencies.
And did this, do you think, had any role? Maybe we've been knowing for a while now that the former president has been speculating about another run for office here. And is there any way to know that maybe the former president, was getting closer to that as the timeline of all this happening with the raid?
It's a bit hard to say. I mean, we have two things going on simultaneously right now. Obviously, the January 6th committee is doing their own investigation, which has been, continuous and has unearthed certain things. And then the Department of Justice, according to news reports, is actually, following up on perhaps some of the information that was garnered by the January 6th committee. So again, a lot of this is speculation. From my experience in the Department of Justice, trying to make decisions that would influence politics is something that's not done. In fact, most of the time, the DOJ or the FBI will actually, perhaps pause an investigation if it would look like it would be affecting the outcome of an election. So if anything, the idea that the president would become a candidate would actually probably deter the Department of Justice from going forward in an investigation, which I believe is maybe one of the motivations for why there has been speculation that President Trump will declare this early as a candidate for president in 2024. But again, a lot of this is speculation. And given my experience with the career people at the DOJ, it wouldn't be driven by political motivations.
And do you think the FBI or the DOJ should come on camera or put out some sort of statement to tell the American people on maybe why this happened? Because it feels almost like the more and more it drags on, more people are going to be upset and thinking, what are they looking for? What's going on? We don't know. Do you think they'll make any statement?
Well, again, this is an interesting circumstance. I would say most of the time, these kinds of public statements or an explanation to the public would not be done by the department or by the FBI, because that's just not the nature of law enforcement to sort of provide that kind of information, particularly if there's an ongoing investigation. In this scenario, because obviously the target is the former president, there's going to be so much media speculation and sort of perhaps political issues that result from this. It wouldn't surprise me if the department or the FBI provide additional information about what they were doing as we go on, given that there's going to be so much attention to this. But historically speaking, you wouldn't see that. And that's what I think reflected in the fact that nobody knew this was really coming because they just have not shared that information with the public.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Roy, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox, really giving us your insight as really just the timeline of events that had to happen for the raid to happen yesterday. We appreciate it right here on Live Now.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. And of course, we always got you covered right here, giving you top stories, headlines, all in the mix right here. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break. Stay right here with us. More to come on Live Now from Fox.